think you can see the shadow of them, but...
Okay! Welcome everybody to Author Content. This is episode 67. My name is Morten, as always, and with me I have my two co-hosts, James Williamson.
Hello, hello.
And Ray Vigilopoulos, straight from the Star Trek Enterprise.
At least she's not
I don't believe your episode numbers anymore, Martin. You have a track record.
You know what though? At least Ray's not wearing a red shirt, so he's safe. He's safe for the link of the episode. You know,
I really wanted to buy a red shirt, but there's such a stigma associated with it because I think I belong in engineering more than I do in like science or command, really.
Yeah.
So, but I just couldn't bring myself to doing it.
We just lost our audience.
Yeah. You know what, though, dude? You're okay. If you have a red shirt, you're okay as long as you don't go down with the away team. If you stay on the ship.
As long as you're Scotty. Scotty's always safe.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
right.
right.
For the rest of the episode, we'll continue going through everyone's wardrobe choices. So, the audience to fast forward maybe 15 minutes.
On that note,
Colleen, I told you this is as good as it gets. We don't.
On that note, our special guest today is Colleen.
Hi, I'm Colleen. I'm a professor of computer science at Harvey Mudd College.
Professor of computer science.
Now, if that were
outranking everyone else in the room.
I know.
And if that was a Star Trek university, it'd be the Harcourt Fenton Mudd College.
That's right. Very good.
Thank you. My geek cred is
Mr.
strong.
Tribble himself.
Yeah.
So
I'm sorry, Colleen. I know you expected more, Colleen.
No.
So actually, I met Colleen at a 6CSE conference in Atlanta. It's a conference for computer scientists and education and for promoting computer science and education, which is really cool in Atlanta, Georgia. And she has a project called CS Teaching Tips. So can you tell us a little bit about that, Colleen?
Yeah, so it's a project to try and help novice computer science teachers. There's a big push by the National Science Foundation to get 10,000 new teachers into computer science, into teaching computer science at the high school level so that more students have access to computer science before the college level. And in doing that, the country is training a lot of teachers who had previously taught math or science or English, and we're training them to teach computer science. And so to aid in that process, what I'm doing is interviewing computer science teachers who have been teaching in the classroom at the high school or college level for a while and saying, you know, when you teach arrays, what makes that difficult to learn? How do you teach it? And doing that for any topic that might be taught in an intro computer science course so that then we can make some of those tips and insights into student thinking and learning accessible to novice teachers. So hopefully we're just getting started. We just started in October. We'll really pick up the pace this summer, but hopefully by the fall, a new teacher could say, hey, I'm teaching students variables on Monday. What are good ways of teaching about variables, and where are my students likely to experience difficulty learning about variables? So we'll start amassing these tips and have them both on our website, csteachingtips.com, and on our Twitter @csteachingtips.
Yeah, so you had the coolest board at the conference. I remember, so people would come up and any sort of short tips that they would have, they would sort of tag them, into this thing. And it looks like you got a ton of them just at that conference and stuff, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so we got a ton of tips just at that conference, and we're recruiting people to interview about their experience teaching computer science. We also had this board that, Ray, you got up, which is placing computer science concepts from easy to difficult and useful to not useful. And so we had a number of topics like recursion appeared in each of the 4 quadrants.
Sounds all right.
So I like the edge cases that you've got here. So what was the tip like on the very far left over there that has only been used once?
That's right.
And it's extremely difficult, like over here.
Read that.
Yeah, I don't know what that is, but I need to know that tip, I think.
Yeah, and that was what people did is they came to the board and they were like, there's nothing in the bottom right corner. What's something in the bottom right corner? And so one of the examples from the bottom right corner was go-to. Very easy, not very useful.
Excellent.
And the whole point was to gain visibility for the project, and so most of what people did was they came to the booth and they posted a Post-it note and then they argued with other people. Like, that's not where Lambda should go.
Just like this show.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
We could probably spend the whole rest of this time placing some of those concepts on the board.
We probably, that's awesome. I like that idea.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
So there's a huge move right now, or over the last year, about everyone should learn how to code, and there's a very aggressive push on the whole, computer science as a skill is important. How do you consolidate that with the fact that it's hard? It's not, not everyone has the background or built-in capability of automatically thinking like a computer and thinking in logical steps and things like that. So how do you approach that in a kind of a rational, global sense?
I think that this is in line with the theme of this show, which is, instead of answering your question, I'm going to argue with you, which is, I think that's crazy to think that not everybody could engage in this process of developing computational artifacts and engaging in programming. I think that actually it's a huge barrier to diversity if we say, oh, to do computer science, you just need this gene, this one gene, and then you've got this innate ability, and you're going to be able to do computer science. And I've had a famous computer scientist tell me, Colleen, maybe there are just fewer women in computer science because they're less innately abled.
Wow.
That's such a great argument.
Oh my God. That did not come out of a human being's mouth.
You just hit like more than the gut, I think.
Oh my gosh.
So I think that certainly there's, in any ability, there's going to be a biological component, but I think we have to assume that we could do a reasonable enough job that we can make this content accessible to anybody. I think a lot of programming languages are innovating to make it so that they are intuitive and accessible for students and people with all experiences to create computational artifacts. I think that there's been a lot of innovation in the last year, looking at like the Code Academy tutorials, thinking about, how do we take someone who doesn't have experience with computer science, who doesn't have access to a computer science educator, and how can we make this content accessible to them? How can we make the error messages meaningful and responsive so that they get something out of this, can feel a sense of accomplishment, and can do cool things? And so
thanks for plugging the competition. Thank you. Well, I remember. No, it's okay. Yeah. I remember that discussion that we had, and I think the consensus that the three of us came wasn't necessarily that some people aren't capable of it. It's just that this sort of push saying everybody should learn how to code. No, I don't believe everybody should learn how to code. Can everybody learn? Absolutely. Does everybody need to? Probably not. But I think lowering what you were talking about is lowering those barriers and introducing it at an earlier age so that people can be exposed to it. Because, when I was in school, I'm going to date myself a little bit here. My entire high school had 4 computers. They were Apple IIes, and that was it for the whole school. And there were a group of us that would, after track practice, we would break into the school so that we could have computer lab time. We actually got busted because we really flummoxed them because we weren't vandalizing the school, we weren't stealing things, we were in the computer lab working, and they were like, "What the hell are you?" So I think lowering those barriers.
Vandalism.
Yeah, that's true. Lowering those barriers to entry, I think, is the important thing here.
I think certainly not everyone needs to become a software developer. Like, that's not going to be everybody's interest, and that's not maybe the world need of greatest need to the world to have a bunch of software engineers. But I think when we think about public education, we think about helping students who maybe aren't in a position to make decisions about their career paths keep all options open. Like, is every student going to become a physicist? No, but we want them to have basic physics because that's going to open doors for them. And maybe the door they want open, or the door that will need to be open for them, is a PhD in physics, or maybe something crazy in chemistry or in engineering. And so I think that when we think about public education, I think we are trying to make decisions that are in the best interest of the students, even if they don't realize those are in the best interest. And I think the extent to which we can keep open a lucrative and high status position like software development open to students who might not know that they're interested in it or might not know that it would be a good fit for them professionally, I think that's an important piece. Even though we don't need everyone to become a computer scientist, we still should, as a society, be keeping those options available to people. And I think also just providing basic literacy, that even if you're not a computer scientist, it might be helpful to know how some of this stuff sort of works.
Yeah.
I teach a 6th grade computer science class over the summer, and one of my students, I was coaching them through, dragging some files onto a USB drive. And he was like, okay. He had done that, and he was like, okay, is it now on that computer? Which is the computer you wanted it on. And I was like, oh, no, this little USB drive, like, it is not wireless. Like, we have to unplug it and then plug it in over there to get those files there. And so some basic literacy, I think, is important that we're providing to all citizens so that they have access to engage with computing as a tool.
I think what I was aiming at, like we're completely on the same page. It's what I was aiming at was in the current structure of education, concepts like logic are not really pushed forward. And what I see as a teacher when I walk into a classroom and I try to teach people programming, for instance, is that they often have a really hard time grasping ideas of hard computerized logic, and they don't understand things like content structure, in a conceptual sense, not in a I can see it on a page sense, but like why the content is structured the way it is. And what I often wonder is, how do we get to a point where that type of skill, the understanding of logic structure, the understanding of how to sort and organize content and process it in a rational way, how do we get that to become a core skill that can then be built on in computer sciences? Because that's often what's missing. When you hear people, that all those ridiculous arguments about how women or minority groups are not interested in computer science, I think a lot of that probably comes from how the hard logic components of it are not taught to specific groups because they're not considered interesting or soft or whatever. Like there's something off about how this type of knowledge is being communicated, because it's not a human thing. It's a mathematical thing. It's a computer thing. So therefore, it's kind of limited.
Yeah,
that's my extremely lofty theory on this.
I don't have great insights into the extent to which this type of logical thinking that I think you're describing is taught in sort of the K-12 space. But one thing that I think is really interesting is that as an education researcher, we don't have really clear ideas about how, if we take a student at the college level who had never seen computer science before, but has a lot of other skills, we don't have concrete ways in which through pedagogy, we build upon those other skills. So talking to students, I find that the strategies they used in structuring an essay are really helpful for them to think about code modularity, right? And that is really helpful. And but we don't have like a clear set of mappings of like, oh, remember how you learned this thing? Well, that's going to be really helpful. And so I think that the students who are most successful are the ones who stumble upon the set of useful transferable knowledge from their previous experience that's outside of computer science. And so I think, one, we don't know what students need to know that we then could build upon effectively. And so maybe we're not teaching that because we don't know what it is. And as an earlier step, students are learning some stuff before college, and we don't know what of that might be helpful to us as college educators teaching computer science to students for the first time. For their first time, like what might even be helpful. So I think you've hit on a hard problem that I think we're very, very far from having solved.
Well, can I ask you a question that I'm actually sort of interested in related to that? Is I would love to go to my daughter's school and volunteer and help out and teach a few computer classes. When, let's say, you're going to do a class for 6th graders, for example. Does your site have some tools and things that I could use to say, well, how am I going to best reach these? What technology should I use? What sample lesson plan might I come up with? Something like that.
Yeah, certainly. So there's two pieces. csteachingtips.com will eventually have ideas for you around that. Around, hey, with 6th grade kids of this type of background or experience, you might try these types of things. Personally, at like ColleenLewis.com, I have links to a Scratch curriculum that I've used with students who are over the summer who are going to be entering the 6th grade. So for the last 5 years, I've been teaching a summer program and developing and refining a curriculum that uses the programming language Scratch.
Okay.
So I have a Moodle curriculum. It's been transferred to the edX platform and is available at mudx.com.org. Oh, I should know. MudX.
You send me the links, I'll put them in the thing afterwards.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, James, I have a suggestion for you, actually. Since I remember you talking about the pig incident last week.
Oh, God, you're talking about Minecraft. You want me to teach them programming in Minecraft?
No, listen to me. When I went to this conference, there was some young kids talking about how they were teaching very young children computer science education through Minecraft, because Minecraft had this whole concept of creating circuits. So they were actually teaching circuitry by teaching the kids how to work with circuits within Minecraft.
Sure.
And because it's something that they really enjoyed, like you were saying, your daughter likes to blow pigs up.
She does.
Creating, I think it was houses made out of dynamite and then blowing them up.
It was amazingly disturbing.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of an interesting concept. So I think you do have to attack sort of people where they are. And if they're already working with something like Minecraft, then you find them there and you let them sort of discover good concepts through what they're using. I think games is probably a really good way of attacking that as well.
Well, Colleen, tell me a little bit about Scratch. What is Scratch, and what applications does it have?
Yeah, so Scratch is a visual programming language, and so instead of having commands that you type, you drag and drop the blocks. And so you can only drag and drop the commands in the language in syntactically valid ways. So it removes some of the barrier of syntax errors.
Gotcha.
With that, what kids are doing is they're moving a character around a 2D space. But there's interesting things. So the language has functions. It has basic control structures. It has variables. And so students can actually do quite a lot of computer science using the programming language Scratch. In my curriculum, what students do is I really focus on iteration, so sort of a basic for loop idea, which for 6th graders is pedagogically relevant, like dealing with variables. Variables is a germane challenge for students entering the 6th grade. I also work on iterative development, so the idea that if we want to get to point C, first we might take step A, and then we might take step B, and we're working towards step C with a series of steps. And I think that's an important skill that students can learn in doing programming of I don't magically get from point A to point C. Like I need to take some intermediate steps.
Right.
I remember when my first attempt at learning programming was in university, and this is just how ridiculous my brain works. I got stuck at public static main void. I was like, what is this? What is public static main void? Like, why do I need to put it there? What is it? All those things mean? And it was, I think my teacher flagged me as that student that we shouldn't talk to at all because he's just lost. But it was because, the barrier that you talked about with the syntactic barrier, I have dyslexia. I read very slowly. I misspell everything all the time. And to approach, hard code, and then someone say, you start by putting this in. You don't need to know why. It just has to be there. It's a great non-starter for a lot of people. And I think that the reason why a lot of people are having trouble approaching code in general, and the reason why we often see people fall off CS tracks and other kind of things, is because the way we approach it is has traditionally been, it's taught by developers for people like them. So the developer speaking developer language to other developers. And I see that especially in open source because, all the documentation is written from the perspective of you should already know this. And you often even see that in documentation. If you don't know this, then whatever, right? If you read the GitHub intro, that just assumes that, how do you install GitHub? Sudo git, you're now making assumptions about my operating system, about that I know what terminal is, that I know how to do commands. There are so many things that are just assumed. And if you don't know, you're kind of just left to the wayside and relegated as unimportant. So, in a teaching situation, I always try to find a way of how do I relate this to something in the real world that people don't need a developer background to understand. And then I can kind of tack it on and say, see, it's just like this real thing. And then here's how it works. Like I'm starting a new course today at a school here in Vancouver. And the first lesson I'm going to talk about what content management systems are. And I'm using Les Paul, the guitarist, as an example. Because he's a perfect example of a content management system. Or rather, what he invented is a perfect example of a content management system. I'll have to write an article about it. See,
I'm pretty sure he invented electric guitar.
He invented, he popularized overdubbing. You know, when you record something and then you record on top of it and then you record on top of it. So that thing that everyone's calling looping now, he did that in the 40s, right? And so basically what he did was he created a system for distributing content in a mechanical way where you can like stack content on top of one another, and then you have multiple recorders and you can play them and kind of modularize it and do whatever you want. And that's actually what a content management system does, is it allows you to put content in a place and then program it so that the content comes out in the order you want it to come out, and you can stack it and replay it in a million different ways. But it's easier to understand when you see someone doing like a loop performance where they're like singing and playing instruments into a machine, and then they just push buttons and it all comes out in a different order, than it is to say, then you go and send a request to the server through a query, and then the server returns an array, and then you take that array and you parse it, and then when you parse the array, you can then attach tags to it and then sort it in. It's a more practical way that people actually understand.
He's like a wind-up monkey. You just pull the string, and Morton just
I think going back to public static void main, I think in all teaching is trying to help students understand in this domain, what do you pay attention to? And as a computer scientist, you've already learned that, oh, in this domain in Java, I don't worry about the public static void main. Like, that's not something when I'm working in Java I'm thinking about. And so it's something you don't want your students to think about. But it also might not be something that you tell your students of like, oh, I'm trying to teach you what to pay attention to in this environment, and that's not something that I need you to pay attention to. And so since I think that's actually sort of a tough sell, a lot of places like Harvey Mudd College are starting with a language other than Java so that you can, there's less stuff that you want them to be not paying attention to that's sort of in their space.
And Morton, to your point, I had a conversation earlier this week with Stephen Hay about that, about we hate the word just, because you know, like if you go to Yeoman, which is a task manager, you know, it says, oh, it's easy to install, just do this and just do this, and you know, it's 2 lines of instructions, and none of it talk about, you know, oh, well, what if I don't have Homebrew installed? Now what do I do? You know, and I was using that as an illustration because I actually tried to install Yeoman one time, and my computer started smoking and it blew up, and now, you know, I don't have it installed. And so, you know, for somebody who is a veteran programmer who knows everything there's know about Node.js, they look at me and go, well, you're a moron. Yeoman is easy. Just do this. And it is. Yeah, it is. That's right. It is dangerous when we make assumptions about what people make, and I think as educators we all have to remind ourselves of that. So it's a good point.
You know, that is really. I was going to say that's really so hard, and I know that what really got me interested in computer science as a career was when I was going from one country to another. So I went from school in Puerto Rico to high school in Chile, where I graduated from high school, and because I was so late into the semester, the teacher wasn't able to put me in the regular classroom. So he essentially just gave me like a list of problems to solve with computer science and said, here, go solve these problems. Here's the book. Kind of your own time. It was the greatest thing anybody. Exactly. Actually, it was the greatest thing anybody could ever do because I had to solve them with Pascal, so I had to learn the language. But what I was actually doing was writing all these programs to do things, rather than like going structurally through a book, starting at public static void whatever, you know, and actually focusing like on the problem rather than on the, you know, what I was writing, and it just made it so fun that that's what I wanted to do. Like, wow, I'm like actually solving a realistic problem instead of just sort of reading a book about how to do something and trying to match and get the answers correct. That was the only class that did that for me, every other class sort of tried to get me to integrate into what they were already doing. He was like, here's some things, go get them. And it was so much fun that that's really what I wanted to do for a living after that.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? I mean, how do you make it not boring? Because a lot of computer science teachers will make it like, here's a book, here's some assignments, like go read this, you know, do these exercises. How do you make it more fun? Because I think that's the key to making it more approachable and you know, having more people get into this stuff.
I mean, one of the things that we do at Harvey Mudd is in the intro course we have a series of modules, and so if there's 5 modules, you might think one of them is really boring, and that's fine. Like, you don't have to, like, to do computer science, you don't have to love every dimension of computer science. Like,
amen to that.
Right? And so, so I think being bored is okay sometimes, but to combat the general boredness, I think really helping students understand that it's about solving problems. I would say that, like, a chemistry teacher would say the same thing, that that really what you need to do is you need to practice using the knowledge and practice solving problems, and then, oh, there's this book that can be a resource for you, and their model of learning might be, oh, you're going to be best off if you just read it cover to cover, but at the end of the day, what it's about is being able to use that information to solve problems. And so I think giving that specific focus. Also at Mudd, we have a lot of extra credit things. So, hey, you're required to do this homework assignment that helps you practice this skill, but if you want to, also do this thing or something else. You know, let us know what you did.
Well, it's like I often think about med students. Like, my dad's a doctor, and I know a lot of people who are studying to become doctors, and it's really interesting to talk to them about what they do in school, because I often think this is how you should structure computer science. You know, because when they go to school, they have to learn all this basic stuff. There's just, like, if you're going to be a doctor, you just have to learn all these things. And a lot of it is horrendously boring. Like, every single bone in your body, right? There's like 210 bones, something like that. You have to learn the Latin names for every single one. Like this one, the middle piece inside your little finger, and the little bone inside your ankle that doesn't do anything. Like, they have to know all this stuff. And when they learn them, they often sit there and they're just reading the list, and they go, oh, why do I need to know this? And then what they do is they relate it directly to something. They say, you know, when a patient comes in and is stepping and have a problem with their foot, it's because of that one little bone in the foot that's shifting. So that's why you need to know what it is, so that you know to diagnose it in another sense. And then when they're done with, like, all this basic understanding of everything, they get put into rotation and they go into a hospital where they have to do every single main job. So they have a clear understanding of what all these jobs entail, and also understand, you know, well, this is actually a pediatrician problem, or this is a podiatrist problem, or this is a ear, nose, throat problem, so they can identify it even though that's not their specialty.
So you're saying that computer science majors should take 4 years of college, like the pre-computer science, and then then go into computer science, and then afterwards be placed, like, at the Google mothership in a residency for a year and a half.
No, what I'm saying is, if you want to go into computer science, you should try to have a generalist basis. Don't start with a language and say, this is what I'm going to become an expert in, because if you do, you box yourself into somewhere where you can't get out. And more importantly, if you pick one thing and you say, I'm going to be an expert at this, you're restricting yourself from realizing that there might be something else you're actually much more suited to do, or that you're much more interested in doing. Because it's not computer science is not a single narrow track. It's a really wide thing with a lot of different branches on it, and you need to have.
I learned Pascal, and it's working well for me, and I don't think I need to learn anything. So that's fine.
Yeah, my basic is really pain in spades.
Go to. Colleen, is in a related question. You know, we were talking before we hit the record button about diversity.
Yes.
And we were just talking about attracting people to computer science. I am the father of 3 daughters who love to blow things up in Minecraft, apparently. But what do we do? Because obviously we're having some success, because we talked about how, you know, the Berkeley program right now, there are more females in the computer science program than males for the first time ever. So we're having some success there. But what do we do to attract diversity in those fields?
Yeah, so one clarification, just to be a stickler, is actually still in the women are still quite underrepresented in the computer science program in general. So they're about 21% in the computer science major across computer science and electrical engineering and computer science. But in the intro course, which is typically a non-majors course and an optional course for those who are majoring in computer science, for the first time, we had more than 50% of the students in the class identify as women.
Gotcha. So that's probably not gonna translate to the entire department, but you'll probably have to.
Yeah, I hope that that Berkeley can do a better and better job of supporting those students as they transition from this intro optional course into their first course, which is, but I think that remains to be seen, and I think that's certainly a challenge at Berkeley in particular, and one that they're addressing. So at Berkeley, they have a few interventions to try and support students who are underrepresented in computer science, which is women, and what they're targeting is first-generation college students, students of color, and women. So they have a program called CS Scholars, where when they take the first required course, which is after this course where we have 50% women, they enroll in a single discussion section, so maybe 1,000 people in the lecture, and then in their 30-person discussion section led by a TA, they're in a group of students, they select into a group of students that are recruited to be students who are first-generation college students, students of color, and women. And through that program, they stay as a cohort for the first 2 semesters of the intro computer science course and get additional mentorship, additional opportunities to meet with faculty. They go on a field trip to a neighboring tech company, and so sort of gain additional exposure and opportunities through that as a way of bolstering their chances of success by creating this cohort. Yeah. I mean, I think I went to Berkeley for undergrad and graduate school, right. and when I was in undergrad, the percentage of women in computer science was, I think, 11 to 13%, and it is startling it was startling to me as an 18-year-old how that felt coming into these tech classes, in my math, my physics, my computer science classes. In high school, I had never been aware of my gender. That was never an issue. Like, oh yeah, I've heard this thing about like women in STEM, but all the women I know, like all of my friends are good at math and science, and I'm really good at math and science, and I didn't get it until I went to Berkeley, and all of a sudden I was one of very few women in the class, and the sort of, I remember some of the first experiences of walking into these 500-person classes where there were very few women, and then being aware of my gender, and I think that's just this feeling of ambient belonging before you even get to like microaggressions and macroaggressions that women, students of color, and first-generation college students face when they're in places where they're underrepresented.
Yeah.
So what do you think that is? I mean, why do you think that's already sort of happened? I mean, in culture.
Like sexism is. Can I just say sexism is why that happens? Is that what you're going for? Or you
I just wonder why you think. Yeah, I mean, but in what sense, like?
Hang on, I want to give you an example, Ray, because I never paid attention to this before I was a father of daughters, and that's God's honest truth. I never paid attention to it at all. But when I went out to get my daughters a Lego set, okay, because I love erector sets and Lego sets, and I had them as a kid, and I used to build all these cool things, and they really spark creativity. You have the boys stuff, and then you have the girl sets, and the girl sets are really small, and they're pink, and honest to God, it was a kitchen that they could put together.
Yeah.
It was a frickin' kitchen. And, you don't realize how early and how often those stereotypes are hammered home about, look, I know what you want. You want to look pretty. You want to have tea parties. You want to, vacuum the floor. And, obviously, And I honestly think that has a lot to do with it because, girls are told that as they grow up, and so by the time they get to high school, they may be interested in math and science, but at that point, so few of them or so many of them are probably peeled off that by the time they get to college, you only have the 10 to 12% left.
And there's also a lot of recent research that shows how boys and girls at a very young age are encouraged in school has a dramatic impact on how they end up learning things. Because if what they found was that if a boy is having a problem, like trying to solve something, the parents parents and teachers and everyone else will usually coax them into trying to solve the problem. And once they solve it, they'll be encouraged in that they're told, you know, great, see how you worked through the problem and solved it. Whereas when girls solve the same kind of problems and have this, like, face the same kind of challenges, they're often told, look how good you are. And what ends up happening is they set this kind of, they get this idea in their head that the reason why they accomplish things is because they're good at it, rather than I've worked my way to the solution. So what ends up happening is when they get older and they face a problem where they go, I can't solve this, instead of saying, I can't solve this because I need to work through it in a different way, they say, I can't solve it because I'm not good enough to solve it. So there's the entire way that the world gets framed because of how we speak to children actually completely changes their understanding of everything about themselves and about how the world works. So it's like it's a systemic social problem that gender is defining how we speak to and engage with children, and that propagates into higher education and then into work. Well, you see it in, you know, you were talking about attrition. Mm-hmm. There's an enormous drop-off, and like you see women are highly overrepresented in higher academia, and then when they get to the end and they actually come to like postdoc, they just fall off. When they come into management positions, they just fall off. And there's no you can't argue that it's because women don't want the jobs or they're not good enough or anything like that, because they consistently rank higher in performance at the school level, and then something happens when you know, towards the end. And I often hear people say, you know, it's because of, you know, choices or whatever, and I always want to retort back and say, so what you're saying is they don't have the drive? They went through school. Of course they have the drive. There's something else acting on this. If you saw this, if it wasn't gendered, you'd be like, what is going on here? But because it's gendered, you're like, oh, we have all these other ridiculous reasons why this might be.
Right. Yeah, when I was in college and I was starting to think, oh, maybe I want to do computer science, I would tell adults in my life. I worked at a summer camp and met adults there, or my parents' friends, and they would word for word say almost the exact same thing, which is, Colleen, you're a people person. You won't like sitting in a basement coding till 3 in the morning. A morning person. I do not like being awake up at 3 in the morning, and I don't like being alone in a basement. I don't like coding alone. Like, they were right on a lot of levels, and I just sort of dismissed it as like, oh, well, you know, these people haven't seen me do computer science. I'm really passionate about it. I think it's really fun. Like, they don't know that. You know, They're just sort of uninformed. But I didn't realize it until my senior year of college, when I had a teammate who was gregarious and just like would be described similar to me as a people person. And I was like, hey, Mark, has anybody ever said this to you? And he was shocked. Like, no one in his whole life had ever thought to even possibly discourage him from majoring in computer science or pursuing computer science. And it seemed like that was all anyone could try and convince me to do. When I tried to declare my major as electrical engineering and computer science at Berkeley, my staff engineering advisor pulled another engineering advisor over to try and talk me out of it, using the same line, Colleen, you're people won't like sitting in a basement coding till 3 in the morning. And so it took me a while to understand how these were like sexist microaggressions. You know, but all I was told was, no, don't do this. This isn't a good fit for who you are or who I think you are. And so I think that there's so many layers to this, right? That yes, as a child, I was more likely to be praised for my ability than my hard work as a young girl. Mm. And then, you know, growing up, I'm going to be reaching these microaggression sort of stuff. So I think it's not going away anytime soon, and I think that we need to increase awareness of it and help understand how this might affect.
Can I ask you a question, though?
Yeah.
Do you enjoy sitting alone in a basement coding at 3 in the morning?
No, I hate basements. I do not like to be awake at 3 in the morning. I typically wake up at 5 in the morning.
Well, there you go. So they were right. They just had it was just the wrong.
I think the problem is the stereotype of the programmer.
Yeah,
no,
that's right.
Yeah, maybe so, because I remember that's exactly like how I convinced myself not to go into pure like computer programming, because I'm like, I mean, word for word, it's exactly what you said. Like, man, I don't want to be like in a cubicle like when I'm 40, like writing code until super late and working like super long. That's like the most depressing thing you could do to me, because I am more of a people person or something. I think that's why I enjoy teaching more and being less of an actual developer, because that's what I thought they did, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. So I'm sure that has nothing to do with anything, but I remember that argument, like you said it word for word, as to why I didn't want to become.
Yeah, so some of my research is looking at how students at University of Washington at Berkeley assess whether or not they fit with the identity of computer science, and to what extent would they need to change their identity to be part of computer science. So thinking about computer scientists are obsessed with computer science. Is that something that's really required, or is that just a pattern within computer scientists? And so if I was going to study computer science, would I need to abandon all my other hobbies? Like, I program for my work, and so I don't program as a hobby. Like, if I was a professional movie watcher, I might program as a hobby. But I don't want to do one thing and that's all I do. Like, that's not, I have interests, right? And so I'm looking at students and how they're saying, is this a flexible component of the identity of a computer scientist, or is it something that I would need to adopt? Would I need to be obsessed? Would I need to be competitive? Would I need to be male? Would I need to not shower? Do you know what I mean? Like, are these things that are just patterns, or are these things that are actually required by the field?
Maybe what's wrong is that we were talking about, like, the perception of what a computer scientist does and what the jobs are and the opportunities are, because I had that same problem with that sort of goal of, here's what you're going to end up doing. You're going to work in a bank, and you're going to use Fortran, and you're going to be there all day in a little tiny white cubicle doing your work. And man, I just didn't want to do that. But if maybe you had something that was more appealing to people, and I remember that, at the time, like, that's really, maybe when I was going to school, which is a long time ago, that's kind of like the jobs that were available for computer scientists. Like, the web wasn't really around, so there wasn't any of this sort of excitement of, we can change the world, we can create all these different things. Maybe that part of it is improving, but I guess I don't really have sort of that frame of reference, because I guess when I was going to school, that's really, I can't remember. I remember I had a friend. And she was the only girl that I can remember from that time that was into computer science, with me. But yeah, I mean, it was really depressing. So maybe changing the perspective of what it is.
There's something weird that I've noticed, and that is, if you go to social sciences specifically, so you go to like sociology or psychology or poli-sci or anything like that, and you go up at the higher levels of these classes, all they do is math and statistics, right? And they write insanely complex programming to make all this statistics stuff work. Mm-hmm. And these types of courses are usually heavily overpopulated by women. Mm-hmm. And it's computer science just dressed up as social science, right? And it's the exact same thing. And then you go to like the Institute of Informatics, and they are like aggressively running get more women into informatics programs because they can't, they can recruit them at the base level, but they keep falling off higher up. Mm-hmm. And it's, when you look at this stuff, it's so obviously a culture problem. It's so very, very obviously a culture problem and a perception problem more than it is a skill set or anything else. So I always wonder, you see, the 2014 looks like the year of women in tech. Like, this is the year where everything is just blowing up, where everyone is talking about it. Even people who used to be very against things like quotas and all this kind of stuff are kind of coming around to the idea now. Conferences are adopting harassment policies. People are aggressively trying to get more women on speaker boards. Like, there are things happening right now. Even then, we still have the same stupid conversations. So I'm really looking for what is it we can do right now that can actually help change the conversation and move us forward, so that the students that started at Berkeley don't fall off. And so that other students who come into school now see this is a viable option for me, regardless of how I identify myself or what I look like. Like, where do we, as the people who are already in the industry, where do we go, and how do we educate our peers so that they can communicate this out in a rational way to everyone else?
I want to add one thing and then try and answer your question. And I see 2014 as like this year where we're talking about women in technology, but I think that to some extent people are trying to get off easy where that's not what diversity means. Diversity doesn't mean someone's gender identity. We have to be thinking about diversity more broadly. People with disabilities, students of color, people of color. And so I think, one, I worry that, like at the Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing, Women in Computer Science Conference, there's tons of companies, I think more than 300 companies show up and fund the event. But at the TAPIA Diversity in Computer Science Conference, which conceptualizes diversity much more broadly, there are very few companies. The big names, Google, Microsoft, are still there, but there's not sort of the buy-in into diversity more broadly defined. And so, one, we need to make sure that as this conversation becomes focused on women in tech, that we are expanding it to include diversity in tech. Okay. Second is, last night was the Women of Vision Awards, hosted by Anita Borg, who runs the Grace Hopper Celebration of Women in Computing conference, and they have started a track for tech companies and companies that employ tech employees, and it's around benchmarking and evaluating their diversity initiatives. And so I think part of what companies and individuals need to be doing is increasing awareness about diversity as an important issue in the workplace, measuring the extent to which they are successful or unsuccessful in some of these efforts, and taking actions around these. So, do you have a sexist, influence in some part of your work culture? What are ways that you as a company need to address that and get buy-in to address that? So I think Anita Borg is a great place for companies to go to say, hey, we're into this diversity thing. What resources are there for us as a company to improve and to really understand how we're doing? And I think Anita Borg and the National Center for Women in Information Technology, NCWIT, has a bunch of those resources. Like NCWIT has things like the top 10 things to build, leadership opportunities for women and technology leadership opportunities for women in your company. Like the resources are out there. I think we just need to get more people thinking about them and thinking about them more broadly than just for women.
Yes.
Amen to that, being Hispanic.
It's kind of strange because of where I am. I'm in Vancouver, where a very, very large part of the population is Asian. So I taught a class at a design school, and 89% of the students were Asian. And I'm teaching another class now, and at least 50% of them are Asian. And because of where I live and because of how diverse the populace is here, it's actually kind of hard to see immediately it's hard to see the diversity problem until you realize there's a large black population in Vancouver that you never see. Because it's somehow they're just drowning out in all of the, it's so split between white people and Southeast Asians and people from like India and Pakistan and Afghanistan, that you get these three dominant groups that are actually three dominant groups that then still block out one ethnic group that you rarely see. So there's it's again that culture thing. It's an awareness issue that you have to actually be aware of these things and then consciously act on them, and it's hard because you're questioning your own decision-making processes, and there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that goes on when you say, I'm not a racist, but maybe I say things that are racist, or maybe I make decisions that are kind of racist, or maybe I do things that are sexist without intending to do it.
Oh boy,
yeah. I think that's a really important mental shift to be like, oh no, I am racist and I am sexist, and understanding the ways in which privileges that we have, like particularly, as a white individual, that I have white privilege, and knowing that part of my racism is not understanding all the ways in which that shapes my experience in life and shapes others' interactions with me, that like I hope that I'm 10% there to really understanding like how influential my white privilege has been in shaping my experiences and other individuals' experiences with me. And I think my experience of realizing how I was treated differently as a woman was an eye-opening experience, and thinking about the unearned benefits that I've gotten as a white woman, a middle-class white woman growing up, I think is important to not being racist. But I think actually, like, these are not problems that are going away. I don't think it's like, oh, tomorrow I hope I wake up and I'm not racist. Like, no, we're going to be racist. Like, we're going to be racist. We're going to be sexist. We're going to be all these things that we stigmatize as so terrible and terrible and terrible. But I think you just got to own it. Like, yeah, I'm racist, and that I need to take conscious actions so that my racism, which I just assume is there because everybody is, make sure that it's not negatively affecting others or mitigating the extent to which it's negatively affecting others.
Wait. You're saying everybody's racist.
Yeah. I think if you look at the research...
I can't go down that road with you. Sorry.
Now this has turned into a real show now.
I think you have to take out the sting. It's not an insult to say that you're racist. It's
Oh yeah, that is an insult. Yeah, I live in the South. That's a full-blown insult.
Yeah, okay. Maybe it's the terminology used. Maybe we should say culturally biased.
Yeah, sure.
I believe in biases. Yeah, absolutely. People have biases.
I think
formed by the environment that you grew up in, but I don't think that makes you racist. A racist means that you hate somebody, or based on the color of their skin.
Yeah, I think it has to do with the definition of the word. Like, this is a semantic problem.
I think it's a word that gets used too often.
Yeah. Does being a racist mean that you're a bad person? No.
Yes. Yes, it does. It does.
That's what I mean. This is a language discussion on the definition of the word you're using, because I do tend to agree that using a word like sexist or racist implies malicious intent. But that doesn't necessarily mean that actually is what it means. It means that the overall general consensus of the meaning of the word, so the referent contains malicious intent in it, whereas the actual meaning of it is something else. But I do agree that the awareness of cultural privilege, especially like someone like me, I'm like the walking example of everything that's bad about our community. I'm the blonde,
you're awesome, man. We love you.
Tall, white dude with a North European education that have every single possible privilege that I can do. So what I have to do is use that privilege to further other people, to help other people to try to give them the benefits that I had in any way I can. That's why I'm in education, because I want people to have the opportunities that I got presented to me due to where I was born and what I look like, right? And I consciously try to push forward other people, because I know that, if I go through conference and I put up my hand, people will ask me questions. So I consciously often sit there and don't do it, because I know if I put up my hand, then other people are going to take theirs down. Or if I put up my hand, then I'll get to ask the question, but other people might have important input. But it's a very hard decision to make, because at the same time,
I don't think I have that sort of social awareness to like even think about that. It's so weird, because when Colleen was talking about how when she was in school she really didn't think about those issues, and I wonder if that's part of what's happening. Like, I remember growing up, I never thought about like racism, and I think that when I came into this country, like I don't think that I understood like what black people in this country had gone through, because that didn't sort of, I mean, like Panama, where I'm from, what happened there was when the country was created, they essentially, in order to build the canal, they pulled in a bunch of people from a lot of different places. It's a really, really mixed environment. So you see in Panama, there's like a lot of black people, there's a lot of Asians, there's a lot of, like, I came essentially from an Italian background, I didn't really think about it in the same way as now that I've been here for a long time, and I sort of have learned about what happened here, and all these different issues kind of came to light when I came here more. Having lived also like in South America, just every culture is like so different that I really didn't think of it as it being as big of an issue as when I moved here. And I'm like, okay, this is sort of different. Like it's a very, very weird issue here, and it was very difficult for me to adjust. So maybe, I don't know, I went through some of that same stuff. Like I didn't think about racism. You know, the only couple of weird times when I thought about it, I remember in Chile, I only saw one black person while I was in Chile, and he must have been some sort of basketball player because he was like 2 feet taller than everybody else. And I never thought about that until every time that I saw him. So I saw him like once every 6 months or something, and I would go, oh wow, there's that guy that is different than everybody else. And I hadn't thought about that until I saw him, because I was dealing with people. Like I didn't think of these people are this way and these people are this other way. But it really sort of became more of an issue when I came here, and I encountered just sort of all these like issues and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think that's a piece of privilege is everybody in different contexts doesn't have to be aware of some part of their identity. You know, that growing up I was not aware of my whiteness, and before college I was not aware of my gender. And that was a privilege that I had, an unearned opportunity or an unearned privilege that I had in those contexts, and that in different contexts that can be taken away, and that I can work actively to try and be more aware of that privilege and when I'm using that privilege. So when I walk into a room and I don't notice the racial makeup of the room, that's my white privilege. That's why I'm the normal. Do you know what I mean? And so I'm not aware of these differences. And so it's not me being colorblind, it's me having white privilege, I think. And so someone without my white privilege might have a very different experience walking into the same room.
Tremendously interesting.
Yeah.
We should continue this conversation. On that note, we are actually out of time.
Yeah. This has been fun.
This has been fun.
Yeah.
I see James is not uncomfortable at all. He's like,
no, I'm fine. I'm fine. No. The final point that I would make is that it is our responsibility, getting back to the point that we were talking about earlier, it is our responsibility as a community of developers and designers to break down any barriers to entry that our industry has. And whether that be girls or people of color or sexuality or any of those things,
disablement,
and accessibility is something that you know that I'm extremely passionate about. So those are things that we need to do as individuals and as collectively as a community. So I think maybe a larger issue is to take a look at what we can do to encourage people and to educate people about our field and to make people feel welcome in it. And I think that's the really critical thing that we need to focus on.
Yeah, and I think identifying the ways in which we are not, ways in which we have institutionalized barriers to students or to people coming into the program.
Yeah.
Ray, final words?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was going to say that I just always get concerned that sometimes we tend to attack this problem in a very divisive way. And if we sort of tell people that they're I don't know, we tell people that they're racist, like, just be aware that creates sort of a pushback. And some people, like, James is kind of offended by that, maybe a little bit, because it has connotations. Like, when you call somebody a racist person, maybe that it has connotations. So I think we need to sort of find a positive way of engaging in this debate and bringing people in a way that doesn't drive them away. I think I told you guys, like, a long time ago, I went to one of these conferences and I saw this. I was walking around like all the booths, and I saw this booth on for like girls who code, I think it was, or women who code, or whatever. And I went to the booth and I felt like, there's nothing really for me to do here, and I kind of felt like I really couldn't help them because they really didn't want me involved in that conversation. And I don't know, like, encourage people to try to find positive ways to resolve some of these issues. And I think sometimes calling people names like doesn't really do that in maybe the best way possible.
But sugarcoating it and letting people think that racism doesn't exist anymore or that they are not racist, I think is also pretty unproductive.
I agree, but I mean, we just need to find that like balance to make it a positive thing. I think everybody probably knows that you have cultural biases. When you're older, I think you definitely tend to run into those. But keeping the debate, civil and positive, I think is sometimes the best way of doing things. Really, it's a lot of times this is the best way of getting anything done is to have people come along with you, as opposed to try to, give them.
I certainly don't
a piece of
assume
your mind.
malicious intent.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I have two things. And then we're ending. First of all, I have a challenge for anyone watching and for everyone here and everything else, and that is, let's make accessibility on the web a baseline standard.
Amen.
Let's just stop with the accessibility as an add-on to things.
That's right. That's right. I totally agree with that.
I see it because I recently submitted I have a theme that's going to be published in the WordPress theme directory probably today, and when you submit a theme, you can optionally add on a tag that says accessibility on it, and then it will go through like the whole theme process, and then at the end they'll tack on an accessibility test, right? And when you go to the theme directory and look, you see there's like 30 themes out of 2,000 that are accessible, because they're the only ones that pass the test. And when you build websites or web apps, accessibility is not hard, but it's hard if you tack it on at the end because you have to rewrite everything. So, as a teacher, I now teach accessibility as the core. I'm like, you make it accessible first, and then you make it look nice and all that stuff. And I encourage everyone else to do it because accessibility is not a privilege. A right to access content is a right. If you publish content, you have to let people access it, and you can't confine certain groups and say they can't access it. So that's one. The other is, there's something I want to say, but I can't because I'll just get in trouble for it. I agree with Ray.
No, you can't leave that out there.
I'm gonna frame it differently. I agree with Ray in that to move this process forward, both in terms of gender, in terms of culture, race, disability, whatever. We need to find a way of talking about this that does not antagonize a group of people and put them in a box and say, you are a bad person. And the reason why I say that is because, especially when it comes to the issue of feminism, what often happens is you end up making a very sharp divide that goes between women and men. And people often misunderstand that feminism is about like putting men down to bring women up, and it's not. And I often have I'm a very openly aggressive feminist, and people often ask me, well, how can you be because you're a man? And that just defines the problem right there. That feminism is not about what gender you are. It's about balancing the genders, giving everyone the same opportunity, regardless of what they identify with. There aren't two genders. There's however many you want, and people can identify however they want. And feminism is just about making sure that people are not judged or defined based on how they identify, but rather based on what they do or who they are as people or all these other things that actually matter. When we start saying, labeling people as bad rather than helping them figure out why they're bad and doing something about it, we're not really getting anywhere because we're just basically making an us versus them situation. So I'm trying to figure out ways of doing this, but it's very hard because it's very easy to just say what you're doing is wrong. You need to do it differently. You don't realize what you're doing, but it's so hard, and it's especially hard because you have to constantly look at yourself and see what you're doing too.
I think it depends on the level of offense. The one hackathon that was advertised where, for people to come on the flyer, it was like free beer and hot women delivering the beer to you.
Oh, yeah.
If you can't see,
no, you can say that.
Those people should be called out for their bullshit,
But I think that's the easy stuff. I think
it is the easy stuff. It is. The subtle part of it, which is one of the things. And again, I know we're going over time. Jen Lucas, who's a friend of mine, is fantastic. She told this story one time about how she showed up to speak at a JavaScript conference, and she walked in, and there were a bunch of women also in the room, and she was like, "Oh, this is great! This is fantastic." And then they all got up and left as soon as the conference started because they were significant others. Mm-hmm. And people throughout the conference, and it was her first speaking engagement, kept coming up to her and asking her who she was here with.
Yeah.
So those are the things that are subtle that people just need to, that we need to do a better job of raising awareness about. That hey, are you making this person uncomfortable through your actions, even if they're not malicious? You have to be aware of those things.
Together we can change the world.
Hot damn.
All right, that is so full time.
It is. We'll get back to talking about web design later after we cure social media. We'll do that first.
No, this was an awesome conversation. I thank you very much for joining us,
Colleen. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Awesome.
We will have you back to talk more about education and other things, because you're obviously a treasure trove of very important information that we need.
I've got some opinions.
No.
That is awesome. We will definitely have you back, and I'll get you to send me an email with any link you want to share, and I'll put it in the description for the thing here so people can find all your interesting stuff and all your links and all the stuff you want people to look at.
Great.
And as always, thanks to James and Ray for joining me.
Yeah, man.
Thanks for hosting me.
And yeah, and thank you for being here. This is I'm very happy with this talk. So
I knew you were gonna love it more.
That is Full Time for Author Content. We'll be back here again next week. Same bad time, same bad channel.
Bye, everybody.